I'm Teresa Caraggio, and this is Third Paradigm. Today I'm talking about Grimdark Fantasy, since I'm usually talking about grimdark reality. This is a new genre that I have already reviewed 4 books of, which I will briefly mention, and then there's another one that I will go into deep. Let's do this. The first book that I mentioned in this genre was Babel by R.F. Kuang, if I'm pronouncing that correctly. This is a brilliantly written book, especially if you love etymology, the British imperial influence, if you can call it that, on China, and also great writing and fantasy. This is one that I combined along with, of course, looking at the biblical, and I will link that at the end. I was so enthusiastic about Babel that I bought the Poppy War Trilogy all in one fell swoop, even though 2 people warned me that if Babel was grimdark, that the Poppy Wars were grim and darker. They were not lying. I ended up reading other books in between to be able to just get through them. Now, there is another new genre of fantasy, which is called romantasy, and it is, of course, romantic fantasy. It takes up the same place in the bookshelf that was cozy sci-fi before, and a couple other customers and I were agreeing that this trend could not end fast enough for us. The Poppy Wars are the exact opposite of romantasy. The love interest kisses her once and then literally stabs her in the back at the same time. So, if you're looking for a romantasy, that is not the place to go. But if you want deep, deep history of things I never knew, it is an excellent place to get it. And I did another episode called Poppy Wars and Mantua Monsters because I had no idea of that piece of history, and they just came together serendipitously for me. So there was no way that I could resist that. So I will link that also at the end. The one that I just read within a 24-hour span, which included twice turning off the light, laying there for an hour, and deciding to read one more chapter, twice, is Blood Over Bright Haven by ML Wang. And this is amazingly written. It has 3 pages of other fantasy authors, most of whom I recognized, saying, "Gods, I wish I could write like her." So if you are someone who reads fantasy, I recommend turning this video off now and going and reading it and coming back later, because I'm going to be spoiling it for you. But for the rest of us, there is a lot of deep analysis that I think it gives, and so I'm going to be delving in. In this story, like Babel, the protagonist is a young person who is entering a magic academy. And in this case, it is a woman who's trying to be the first ever to be part of that. I don't know how these Chinese authors have figured out the link between the Old Testament and the British imperialism before most of the rest of us, but that seems to be evident to them. In this case, there are scriptures that they have from their own patriarchy, and I'll read a few excerpts of those which start the chapters. Witches, beasts, and all manner of wicked beings massed in their thousands in the basin that was to be Tehran. And great was our fear. But Lord Leon went before his mages and spoke thusly: "Do not fear the forces of darkness, for God who promised us this land is with us, and his will is light. When you go against the tribes of the enemy, hold your staff before you as a torch and watch the unclean fall to the light of truth." I will not fear evil, for where I go, God's light goes also. In the presence of God, I will not turn my gaze, though light burn me. For light will show the truth of the world, and all the world's truth is of Firin the Father. Children who seek truth, look to your fathers. Women who seek truth, look to your husbands. Servants who seek truth, look to your masters. All who seek truth, look to the mages, for God makes his wisdom known on their lips, and his will known in their work. So here you have that contrast that's throughout the Bible, where light represents good and darkness is evil. And from my research, that started with the Aryans, which does not mean white people, although it also means white people. But it was the heirs, it was the rulers, the ones who came and imposed hierarchy, which was the original spelling of Aryan, was H-E-I-R. So this case, you see the same thing. You see that trickle down of hierarchy and how the light is always at the top and the dark, which are the slaves and the colonized, who are at the bottom. The protagonist's name is Siona, and that's S-C-I-O-N-A. I've talked before about how the word Zion comes from Scion, because what it is a graft. It's taking a hardy root, chopping it off, and using that in order to help this graft flourish. It was usurping and infiltrating and then taking over and turning those people into slaves and servants. In this case, what she is doing in this magical academy is that she is a siphoner, is that they go and find energy sources from outside the dome of Brighthaven, and then they sap those energy sources and make it so that they power all these wonderful technological innovations. She is an innovator, and she loves her job, and she is very good at it. The other protagonist is someone who comes from outside, where it is winter, and where he lives, there is something called blight. And blight is something that attacks people and unravels them, takes their blood, unpeels their skin, attacks and siphons out their energy. You probably can see where this is going as the spoiler alert. So she develops a clear mirror, a way in which you can actually see what's happening rather than these fuzzy images. So she goes back to the original doctrines and is able to do this. He ends up, through them making fun of her, being her assistant, even though he was the janitor. And he, of course, turns out to be very perceptive about what's going on. So she creates this clear mirror and finds out that they are siphoning people, that it is the people from outside the dome who are being stolen in order to provide their energy. And that unravels her mentally. Here I'll segue into my own history and why I relate hard to Siona. My awakening began soon after 9/11, when I felt like reality had unraveled for me. And I couldn't get anyone who understood what I was saying, even though at that time what I was saying is so much milder than what I am saying now. I happened into a bookstore, and as if by magic, Derek Jensen's Culture of Make-Believe practically leapt into my hand. That book talks about not the big violence, but the everyday violence. How much violence is required for us to have the quality of life that we have, that every product traces back to things that we take for granted, that we don't even see, we don't even question. And that book shook me to a level where I would walk into grocery stores, leave my cart empty, and walk back out because I knew too much about every single one of those products. There was nothing that I could buy in good faith. And even if it was something that was supposed to be organic or whatever, I knew that that was a ruse. I knew that there was still this disconnect with the fact that we were not producing and that the people who were not consuming, and that their lives had been turned into essentially being siphoned, where they were just energy that was feeding into our world. And I thought, if I could just get people to see it, if I could just get people from a place of goodwill to see child trafficking and slavery in the cocoa industry, for instance. We've just passed Halloween, and I used to send my daughters out with little pieces of paper to give to the people that they trick-or-treated from, saying, you probably don't know about this, and if you did, I'm sure you'd care, so let me tell you. That obviously was a dismal failure, and that is much what Siona runs into in the book. I felt that this book brought me back to a place of being honest again about my economic system, which I never developed because economics were not being fair enough to us. My focus has always been on the people who are being enslaved by the system. We are servants, but we as servants have been made complicit. And that is the really hard thing to deal with. In the book, when Siona ends up showing what's really happening, it doesn't cause people to say, oh my God, we've got to change this. Instead, it causes the lowest class, the slaves, to revolt and to endanger all the people who were servants. And that ends up creating chaos, and everyone turns on her in a way that I found true in a very tiny, tiny way. That whenever I would tell someone what was really going into the products that we had, their reaction was, why are you making me feel guilty? That even though the action of what was happening was the same, whether they knew about it or not, I don't think the person who was producing that good cared whether they knew about them or didn't. But that person could be oblivious until I came around. And what I did was put them in this conflict because they could no longer lie to themselves. And so it was my fault that I was making them feel guilty. I, after some time, decided that that wasn't going to work. And Siona goes through that same revelation and does not survive it, by the way, for a complete spoiler alert. But she goes through that whole process of seeing what happens when people are exposed for that cognitive dissonance because they've made themselves be complicit. They haven't made themselves, others have made them. The organizers of these plans have made it so that everyone is complicit. In another parallel to my research, what she finds out through her relationship with the janitor, who is a Kuang, is the name of that culture, is that the original ones who used magic and who used it for protection were women. And they were the ones who were at home. So they had the ability to pass on this knowledge and to learn it, rather than the men who were often out hunting or fishing. And so the women were the ones who wove these spells of protection. I think that the gods are failing us because there are no gods. And that what we are learning from is going back to what the original magic was. The magic that is our protection, that is making this world, that's interweaving the events of this world. And I will end with one last passage from the book. I have been a goddess. I know you will think me silly, but I am a pious lady of good manners, and I must tell the truth. I have been a goddess, but I am a pious lady of good manners, and I know that in this house there is only space for one God. I am a pious lady of good manners. I will not stay in someone's house where I am not wanted. And that is one of the wives of the mages in a way that shows that they kept backing off until there came this crack in the system. And that crack in the system is what leaves space for something new. For more grimdark fantasy mixed with grimdark reality and the patriarchal playbook that is the Bible, here is Babel. And here is Poppy Wars and Manchukuo Monsters. Thank you for watching.